Shabbat shalom, everyone. So, there have been many times that people have come to me and have said, how can we say that our tradition is a good and kind tradition when we have within our tradition sections that still seem to put us back in those early dark ages, so to speak, right? How can we say in the 21st century that we're a good tradition when we're reading in our Torah portion about what happens when somebody is in servitude to you, right? When somebody is enslaved in that sort of way. And one of the answers that I give is it's actually in these very sections that we see the depth and we see the wisdom of Judaism. Because this Torah was not written in a vacuum. It was written in a world in which human beings are human beings. It was written in a world where there were certain realities. And I would argue to say that the realities of the servitude that we're going to read in this week's Parsha are actually in some ways still in force today. In a different way, I'm not talking about the slavery that we see, physical slavery, right? I'm not talking about trafficking and all of those sorts of things, which, by the way, is absolutely in existence today. But what we're going to see here is this concept of indebtedness. Indebtedness is a reality of human existence, and the way in which we deal with that tells a lot about who we are. So let's look and let's see what our Torah says. We're going to open up to page 744 in our red Humashim that are in front of us. A little bit earlier it starts and it says, if your kinsman is in dire straits and comes under your authority, right? Your kinsman is in trouble, right? Don't exact from him advance or accrued interest. Let him live by your side. Don't create an economic situation that is going to crush him, right? Because he's your kinsman. He's another human being. We have to treat him with a certain amount of respect. But let's turn to 744 and page 39, verse 39. If your kinsman under you continues to be in straits and must give himself over to you, do not subject him to the treatment of a slave. He shall remain with you as a hired or bound laborer. He shall serve with you only until the Jubilee year. What is this saying? What is this saying? It's actually telling us the opposite of what we may think. It's actually saying, well, you can't take somebody as your slave, right? You can't say, well, he's indebted to me, so I own him now, right? That's not okay. You can you can bring him on as a hired labor, but you can't own him as a slave in that sort of way, even though we hear that term being used. And part of the challenge is that la'avod means to work, right? The root la'avod means to work, and an eved is how we translate a slave. And so the boundaries get blurred. But let's continue to see what it says here. So he shall serve you only until the Jubilee year. There's a limit in the amount of time that he can serve you. And then he and his children with him shall go free from your authority. He shall go back to his family and return to his ancestral holdings. Why? For they are my servants, whom I freed from the land of Egypt, that they may not give themselves over in servitude. And verse 43, you shall not rule over him ruthlessly. You shall fear your God. Now that word ruthlessly is a very interesting word. The Hebrew is bifarech, right? What does that mean? It's actually one of the unique or rare words within our Torah. It appears twice here. It appears once in the prophets, but the only other time it appears is in Egypt, in terms of what the taskmasters were doing to us, right? They were treating us bifarech. And I want to dive into this because I think the rabbis, as they tried to understand this word, and it's mentioned twice here. So it's mentioned in verse 43, lo tirdeh lo bifarech, right? You shall not rule over him bifarech. And then if you go all the way down to verse 46, the end, but as for your Israelite kinsmen, no one shall rule ruthlessly over one another. Bifarech, again, that word. So what do you think it means, right? To rule ruthlessly over somebody. What does that mean to you? What is that saying that we're not allowed to do? Any guesses? What does it mean? To rule ruthlessly over somebody. Diana?
I think it's about being fair, being kind, and like when I think about ruthlessly, I go back to Shemot when they were in Egypt and they themselves were avadim, they were slaves, and then like Pharaoh kept like upping the ante. He'd say first, okay, you have to get this many bricks, and now you have to go get your own stuff, and then you have to make more bricks, and he just kept upping the ante for them to basically stay alive. So I think it's like just that's ruthless, cruel. And then of course there's also like the physical, the beating and all that stuff that happened to slaves and inhumane. Treat them like indentured workers, and they were really part of your family too. I mean, they ate, they were living there and they were keeping them in boat, and so
So Diana is saying that there's a cruelty to this, right? That in Egypt, what Pharaoh was doing is he kept upping the ante, right? Whenever things sort of got okay, he made it worse, and he made it worse, and he made it worse. And there's that cruelty aspect to it that is bifarech. We need to treat them as if they're part of our family, because in many ways they were. They stayed with us, and they were part of our family. Rachel?
to me it means you have to remember that they are also human beings who are made in God's image as well.
Nice.
You can't treat them as something less than.
Beautiful. Rachel is saying that we have to remember that they are human beings made in God's image as well, and we can't treat them as something less than that. Good. Deb?
I think the simplest version is just be a good boss. And, I think there's a lot of value in the Torah of teaching us how to be good in leadership. And there's a mental component and a physical component of what you do physically and what your nation does do, but there's a mind game component also.
Mm-hmm.
And so the ruthlessly can play a role into both of those.
Good. So there's a physical component, but there's also a mental component. What you said at the beginning was be a good boss, right? And look, we've all worked for all sorts of different people, right? Sometimes they treat us well. Sometimes they treat us with indifference. Sometimes they treat us actually in such a way that makes us feel less than. And maybe that's what this is talking about: is don't treat somebody so that they feel less than. Even, and this is where it gets difficult, right? Because remember, this is a situation where they owe you, right? Let's understand what the situation is here. They are in debt. They can't pay their debt. And in essence, they're working off their debt to you because they can't pay it off. If they would have been able to pay it off, you wouldn't have any ownership over them. You wouldn't have any authority over them, right? But because they can't pay off their debt, and sometimes that's a reality of the world, right? We get into a place where we can't pay off the debt to somebody that we have. How does that play out, right? How does that make itself seen? Anybody else? Jack?
The word that comes to mind is humiliation. So that what you don't want to do is humiliate people. You have to treat them with some degree of respect so that they don't feel less about themselves than should.
Nice. Jack said that the word that comes to his mind is humiliation, right? We shouldn't humiliate. We shouldn't go out of our way to humiliate so they feel less than themselves. Good. Anybody else? So it's interesting, right? the rabbis are picking up on a lot of these things, and here's what I would say. The term befarech resides entirely with the way in which the person is giving the work, not the work itself. Right? Not the work itself. Because, look, sometimes there's hard work that needs to be done. If you're working in an agricultural society and you need to pay off your debt, chances are you're going to be working in the fields. You're going to be doing hard work, right? But that doesn't mean there are a lot of people that do hard work in this world and they feel great about themselves and they're treated well and they're supported and they're thanked for that hard work that they do. So it's not about the work, it's about the way in which that work is being presented or conveyed. And Rashi, in the Exodus text of this, he reads as follows. He says, Befarach means hard service which crushes, right? Mifarechet. The word mifarechet means to crush down, right? Mifarechet. It crushes the body and shatters it, right? It's not just about the labor itself, but there's an intent behind that to demean, to diminish, to make that person feel less than. The Kitzur Baal HaTurim says something very interesting. He actually takes it to a level of it being almost insidiously cruel, right? What does he say? Befarach means befei rach. Hear the words there? Fe rach, farech. Ferach means with a soft mouth or soft words, right? In other words, it's, oh, don't worry, I'll take care of you, right? Everything will be just fine. But that intention behind it, again, is to crush. There's even a more insidiousness there of the demeaning as we go through. In our location, Rashi says as follows: "You shall not rule over him befarech. Do not force him to do some useless work with the sole purpose of vexing him." Right? Rashi actually gives examples. He says, "Don't say to him, 'Warm this cup of drink for me,' when it's unnecessary, or 'Hoe beneath this tree until I come back.'" Right? Because he doesn't know when you're coming back. You don't even know when you're coming back. Right? It's this almost uselessness. Right? And so much so, and I'll give you one more example. Maimonides in the Mishnah Torah codifies this. He says, "It is forbidden to work an indentured servant ruthlessly." What is meant by ruthless work? It is work that has no definite time or limit, or needless work, designed only to keep them working and occupied. Right? It's this sense of working and it's useless. And that actually, I think, if we go back to Egypt, what was the crushing piece of all of this? Yes, it was hard work, but people do hard work all the time. It was this sense of futility, this sense of uselessness, this sense of being on that little hamster wheel and never going anywhere, right? That's what made it so crushing. And look, how many of us, we've been, growing up, I had a couple of jobs and stuff like that where I'm like, why am I doing this? What's the reason, right? In school, for some of our students, there are some assignments that we take home. We say, okay, this is a great assignment. This makes me think. And there are some assignments we say, like, this is just busy work. There's no reason for this. There's no reason to do this. And when we feel like we're being told to do something that is useless, the impact on us is severe. It's a strong impact on us. And to me, that's what this section of the Torah is saying as we're ending Vayikra, right? As we're ending all of these labors that we were doing for the temple, for the Beit Hamikdash, right? For the tabernacle in the desert. As we're starting to think about what it's going to mean to go into the land of Israel, there's going to be a lot of hard work that we're doing, but we're working for a purpose. So the two messages for this is, as workers, right, we need to make sure that we find ourselves in a place where we're working for a purpose. We're working for a reason. And it could be hard, and it could be difficult, and it could be times even that we feel like there's certain things that we don't like to do at that moment. That's part of life. But if we're doing it for a purpose, for a reason, then we lift ourselves up out of that. We don't feel like we're this slave to whatever it is. But more importantly, this sense of indebtedness, right? How often do we, as somebody who can hold that over somebody owes you a favor, how do we treat that person? How do we treat that person? How do we think about that person? Not even just in terms of actually being a physical slave or a physical laborer, but just that sense of indebtedness to one other person. How do we make that person feel good about themselves? How do we make that person feel like this is a partnership? Sure, I'm here to help you. You know, it's interesting. People come, and I'm sure Rabbi Ern has the same experience. You know, Rabbi Ern and I have Rabbi's discretionary funds that we use for tzedakah. We use to help people when they need help. And over the years, there have been people who have come for all sorts of different reasons, right? During 2008, 2009, we were literally helping people pay their electric bill, helping people pay their rent so they wouldn't be out on the street, right? And very often people will come in. It's a hard thing to do, to come in and to say, I need help. It's a very hard thing to do. And the way that I frame it, and I'm sure Rabbi Ern does the same, is that's what community is for. Today, we're going to help you because you need help right now. 2 weeks from now, 2 years from now, 10 years from now, please God, you're going to be in a position, you'll have made it through here, and you're going to be in a position to help that next person. It's not about indebtedness. It's about being there to support one another, because that's what we as community do. That's what we as Jews do. And as we think about that, it shifts the way that we perceive that other person, not as less than, but as a person who we have the opportunity to come together and help. I have the resources, this person needs those resources, but later on, because of this moment, hopefully, they're going to be able to pass that along and have the resources later on to help somebody else. And in doing so, we support our community and we lift everybody up as opposed to pushing people down. That, to me, is the lesson of Befarech in this week's Torah portion. Any questions or comments you guys would like to make on this? Please, Diana.
I think I just brought to mind, like, it's like we have this prohibition, don't treat people before, but then like we just read the Ahav Talareas HaKamocha. I think the two of them just really fuse so well together. It's like, first off, like, you know, you have to, we've already like discussed that in the past, but the whole thing about love your neighbor as yourself. And now it's like, and now that we've established this, within that vein, we don't do this. And then the other thing is, why is this even here? Because they were living this life of being ruthlessly ruled in servitude. They didn't really have role models for how to be a good boss. Like, to Debbie's point, you know, there's no HR here.
Right.
They have to kind of figure out on their own. Well, we only know that it's what we experienced and it wasn't so good. But memories are short, you know, because remember, they're 5 minutes out of the gate going, well, it was better when we were there. So
Good.
now they need a better model for how to do this.
So, Diana, you said two things that I think are important. I'll start with the second thing first is, you know, their role model for what it means to employ somebody or to be over somebody is Egypt at this point in time. That's not a good role model. But at the same time, God is able to say, look, you didn't like that. Don't do that to somebody else. It was right there in their memories. And so that's why these words are being used, right? Don't do that. You didn't like it. Don't do it to somebody else when you have that. But the other side of it, Diana, that you said I think is really important is this is framed in the negative, meaning don't do this. But there are also positive mitzvot that we have that say the same thing from the positive side, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself, right? And the two go together. It's such a powerful piece of all of this. Don't treat somebody differently then you would like to be treated, then you would want to be in that situation. Don't treat somebody differently than you because they are in a different circumstance, because they look different, because they act different, because they speak different. These are fundamental values within our tradition. And here it starts, right here. Shabbat shalom, everyone.